All right, let me tell you something. If your closest friendships are built around complaining about your problems in life, if your romantic relationships feel most intense during periods of crisis, or if you bond with people by sharing your deepest and most problematic wounds, especially within hours of meeting them, then really we need to talk. Because there's a difference between genuine intimacy and what we call trauma bonding. And confusing the two is keeping you stuck, or maybe keeping you stuck in unhealthy relationship patterns. Welcome back to Huddle Psychology, where we get uncomfortably real about the stuff going on in your head. I'm Rahul Nair. We are here to decode the psychology behind why we do the weird things we actually end up doing. All right, so let's set this one up. Our generation has, in many ways, normalized trauma sharing as intimacy. We bond over anxiety, we connect over depression, and we kind of mistake emotional intensity for emotional depth. Don't get me wrong. Sharing struggles can be part of, healthy relationship building. And but the problem is when your connections are primarily built on shared pain rather than shared joy, you're not building intimacy. That's the problem. You're building codependency, not intimacy, but codependency. So here's what I'm seeing. Friendships that kind of revolve around venting sessions, but kind of fall apart when both people are maybe doing well. Romantic relationships that feel kind of very passionate during periods of high drama, but boring during periods of stability. People who can trauma dump to acquaintances, but struggle to share good news with close friends. This is not just about oversharing. That's not exactly the problem. It's about using emotional crisis as a shortcut to intimacy and then wondering why your relationships feel unstable or exhausting. So, let's get into some definitions and defining some terms. Trauma bonding. Trauma bonding originally described the psychological attachment between an abuser and a victim, created through cycles of abuse and relief, and abuse and relief. But the term has now expanded to kind of include any relationship primarily held together by shared suffering or crisis. Genuine connection, on the other hand, is built on mutual respect, shared values, emotional safety, and the ability to support each other through both good as well as bad times. Here's how trauma bonding works psychologically. Intense emotional experiences. Intense emotional experiences kind of create very strong neural pathways and memories. So When you share traumatic experiences with or some kind of heavy emotional content with someone, your brain associates that person with intensity and importance. This can feel like deep connection, but it's actually just emotional intensity. So, trauma bonding can look like something like this. Relationships that kind of thrive during periods of crisis but struggle during periods of calm and success. Connecting primarily through complaints and problems and issues or shared suffering. Feeling closer to people during the worst moments in their lives rather than the best ones. Using emotional intensity as a kind of barometer, a measure of relationship depth, and difficulty maintaining relationships when you're both mentally healthy. This is how trauma bonding looks like. Now, on the other hand, genuine connection may look like this: relationships that remain strong both during good times as well as bad times, connecting through shared interests, values, humor, and experiences, feeling happy for each other's good news and growth, emotional intensity that comes from joy, excitement, and mutual support, and relationships that kind of enhance your well being rather than drain it. Now, here's the tricky part. The tricky part is that trauma bonding can feel more intense than genuine connection, especially in the initial stages. Your nervous system kind of interprets intensity as importance, but intensity is not the same thing as intimacy, and drama is not the same as depth. Important to keep that in mind. Social media makes this a lot more worse because we are always rewarded for sharing our pains, our problems, and our struggles. Mental health posts, as you might have noticed, get more engagement than posts about, say, normal happiness. This teaches us that pain is more interesting, far more interesting than connection worthy, far more interesting and connection worthy than, say, content about contentment and joy or happiness. So, how do you build genuine connections? The question is, how do you build genuine connections instead of trauma bonds? Once again, I'll offer three strategies here. Let's go one by one. Number one is what I like to call the joy test. Pay attention to how you and your friends respond to each other's good news. Do you feel do you feel genuinely excited someone when something goes well for someone, where it goes well for them, or do you feel kind of disconnected during their happy times? Do they kind of celebrate your wins, or do they seem more engaged when you are going through your problems or when you're struggling? Healthy relationships involve celebrating joy together, but not just surviving crisis together. So let me repeat that. Healthy relationships also involve celebrating joy together and not just surviving crisis together. Strategy number two: diversify your connection points. So if your relationships are revolving around problem solving and emotional support, start introducing other elements. Share something you're excited about. Plan activities that are kind of fun purely for the sake of it. Discuss topics that aren't always so emotionally heavy. If a relationship can't survive without constant crisis or deep emotional processing, it might be a trauma bond rather than a genuine friendship. It's a red flag. Third strategy, practice emotional regulation before sharing. So, before trauma dumping or seeking emotional support, ask yourself this question: am I sharing this to process and heal, or am I sharing this to feel connected to someone? Am I sharing to process and heal, or am I sharing to get connected to someone? There's nothing wrong, like I said, there's nothing wrong with seeking support, but if crisis sharing is your main, primary intimacy strategy, you might be training people to associate you with problems rather than joy. Look, once again, this does not mean you can't share struggles with your friends or that all emotional intensity is about trauma bonding. No. Healthy relationships absolutely include supporting each other through difficult times as well. Absolutely. The question really is about balance and foundation. Ask yourself, would this relationship survive? Would this relationship survive if both of you were consistently happy and stable? Would this relationship survive if you guys were consistently happy and stable? If you removed the crisis, the complaints, the problems, the issues, the emotional intensity and drama, what would be left? If the answer if the answer is nothing much, then you might be dealing with trauma bonding rather than genuine connection. So, here's your homework for this week. Notice your patterns in relationships. Do you feel closest to people during their crisis moments or celebration moments? When you want to feel connected to someone, do you naturally, instinctively share something difficult, or do you share something positive? Try this experiment. For 1 week, lead with positive sharing when you want to connect with someone, with your friends, with your family, whoever. Share something you're excited about, something funny that happened to you, or ask about their wins instead of their problems. See how that goes. See how it feels. So that's what we talked about in this session about trauma bonding and the difference between trauma bonding and genuine connection. So try this experiment as a homework for the coming week and see how it feels. And next week we are going to be talking about breadcrumbing yourself. Yes, how we use the same manipulation tactics on ourselves that toxic people use on others. It's about to get very real about self sabotage, my friends. Very real about self sabotage. But that's next week. Again, coming back to today's session, drop me a comment. Have you noticed trauma bonding patterns in your relationships? How do you balance sharing struggles and celebrating joy? Let's try our best to normalize healthy emotional intimacy. Healthy emotional intimacy. And as always, if you want to go deeper into this subject, everything that we covered today, then head over to huddlepsychology.substack.com, where you will find the full research breakdown. And If you want to talk it over one-on-one, then simply hit me up at rahul@huddlepsychology.com. And let me leave you again with one note about my very first book that came out last month. It's titled Already Home, Advaita Vedanta for Everyday Living. And it's available as a Kindle book across all Amazon marketplaces and available as a paperback edition as well in the UK and the US. So I'd be immensely grateful if you support my debut humble offering. So, once again, until next time, keep huddling, keep growing. Ciao for now.